Welcome or welcome back to the Future of Safety Science series, where we are asking the big questions about how the world is engineered to keep us safe. So each month we have conversations with our experts in safety and sustainability. We have the opportunity to really drill down into specific inquiries and research and to describe the process and impacts of global standards. As Dennis said, we're using Kahoot throughout today's webinars, and we have the questions tab in your control panel on the right side of your screen. I want to encourage you to jump in. We really want you to be part of this conversation. I have the distinct pleasure of introducing you to our presenters today, who are going to talk about two seemingly unrelated topics that are definitely growing within our standards organization: cybersecurity and sustainability. Caroline Truheit is the standards engineer and project manager at Underwriters Laboratories, developing safety and sustainability standards for new and emerging technologies. Caroline started her career at Underwriters Laboratories 8 years ago, testing and certifying PPE for firefighters. Denise Durant is the Standards Engineering Program Manager for the Standards Division of Underwriters Laboratories. She began her 14-year career at Underwriters Laboratories as a certification engineer, holding roles as a technical lead and subject matter expert in the testing, inspection, and certification business for building life-saving technologies. I have been looking forward to this conversation for some time. Denise, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thank you, Kelly, and hello, everyone. As Kelly mentioned, my name is Denise Durant, and I'm joined by Caroline, and today we're going to talk about sustainability and cybersecurity. And these are two technical areas that are impacting our society based on the products and systems that we interact with every day. So if you're wondering why we're sharing information on what appears to be two very different topics, research indicates that cybersecurity and sustainability are growing areas within the safety and risk fields. According to the World Economic Forum and the 2021 Future Risk Report, the next decade is going to be defined by the environment and cyber risks. Next slide, please. So our presentation today will cover how cybersecurity from both the security and resilience standpoint, as well as sustainability, are impacting the state of technology. As a standards development organization, our organization develops standards and other documents that address safety concerns for many of the products and systems that we all use on a daily basis. I'm going to kick things off by covering cybersecurity and cyber resiliency, and then I'm going to transition things over to Caroline, and she's going to cover sustainability. Next slide, please. So to get started, let's talk about standards and safety. Our nonprofit Underwriters Laboratories focuses on extending our safety mission globally through research, outreach, safety education, and standards development. By incorporating resilience and the impacts of the environment into the standards development process, we can help ensure that our homes, schools, and workplaces better withstand these impacts to position our communities to recover more quickly. Next slide, please. Our organization works toward our mission for a safer world by taking a multidisciplinary approach to developing and maintaining standards that address safety, security, and sustainability issues. And on the next slide, you'll see that because we are a global organization, we have the ability to touch stakeholders around the world to have a global reach and incorporate local regions and representation within our process. Our safety standards outline the processes in which products are tested to help mitigate risk, injury, and danger. And in developing these standards and in revising existing standards, we combine extensive safety research, stakeholder input, and scientific expertise with an uncompromising focus on quality. And on the next slide, you'll see that as new products and systems enter the market, and as many of these products and systems become interconnected, and this means that different products can talk to each other, we've seen an increase in product safety concerns. When these new products hit the market, safety concerns have grown, and in some cases, the lack of applicable safety standards has meant that there are not clear guidelines about how to address these issues. A great example that I always share is the release of the hoverboard back in 2015. When this product hit the market, there was not a safety standard available to specifically address the hazards and risks associated with this product. So from late 2015 up until May of 2016, the U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission, or CPSC, investigated more than 60 hoverboard fires in 20 states. As battery designs and products that incorporate batteries like the hoverboard rapidly evolve, it's important to ensure that innovations don't bring latent hazards that result in harmful occurrences such as injuries, fatalities, and property loss. So UL Standards has worked with our stakeholders to create new safety requirements for these types of products. And for example, our standard UL 2272, which covers the safety of electrical systems for self-balancing scooters, I know a mouthful, but that standard is specifically for hoverboards. It helps to ensure that consumers are protected from electrical and fire-related hazards. And most importantly, where product safety risks were primarily centered around the risk of fire and electric, now we're seeing greater risks to the environment, personal health, and systems, which is why our standards portfolio has grown to include standards that address the growing risks in these areas. So on the next slide, let's get into cybersecurity. So this is a growing area, and as I mentioned, by the 2020 Global Risk Report, it's one that has expanded from just focusing on security and protections to system resiliency. I'm sure everyone has unfortunately been a victim or heard about a cybersecurity incident. These can range from simple password breaches to a full system outage. So with that in mind, on the next slide, we're going to do something a little interactive. I want you to consider ways in which you've been impacted by cybersecurity. And the question we're going to pose here is, what is your top cybersecurity or security concern? And you have a couple of seconds to put that in. All right, a few more seconds here. All right. So wow, I see a couple of good things. Oh, my money, that's a good one. Stealing my bank, credit card fraud, identity theft, financial privacy, ransom attacks. These are all things that we're going to slightly cover today. But the point of this question is to really help you understand, again, what are the top concerns that most people have about, cybersecurity, especially at a time where many of the products that we use on a daily basis are interconnected or they incorporate some type of software. So great job. On the next slide, we're going to delve into cybersecurity a little bit deeper. So cybersecurity is known as the practice of protecting systems, networks, and programs from digital attacks. These cyber attacks are usually aimed at accessing, changing, or destroying sensitive information and can include extorting money from users, as well as situations where normal business processes are interrupted. So a few of you hit on a lot of these things in the word cloud. Cybersecurity can also describe a company's ability to protect against and avoid the increasing threat from cybercrime. Cyber threats like hacking, phishing, ransomware, and even what's called distributed denial of service attacks have the potential to cause enormous problems for organizations and products that incorporate software. So not only can companies suffer serious service disruption and reputational damage, but the loss of personal data can also result in huge fines from regulators. So on the next slide, we wanted to provide an overview of the different types of attacks. In 2015, cybercrime around the world cost $400 billion, and this amount was expected to reach $6 trillion by 2021. While we don't have the actual numbers for 2021, we do know that the pandemic alone caused an increase in cybercrimes from 2019 to 2020, and alone accounted for over $250 million. And this excludes 2021. So these types of cyber crimes that are most popular include things like malware, which includes ransomware. So you can think of malware as the malicious software that can damage your computer or system, and ransomware as an extension of malware that blocks access until a ransom is actually paid. In 2021, ransomware was the #1 cyber attack. Other attacks like phishing, which I'm sure many of us have been a victim to, and even what's called man-in-the-middle attacks are also very popular. We could spend the full hour on just this slide alone, but the takeaway here is that there are many different types of cyber attacks, and all of them target users of systems and cause disruption, which is why we have to be knowledgeable about these types of attacks to ensure that the products and systems that incorporate software and connectivity functionality can withstand these attacks, but most importantly, recover from them. So on the next slide, you will see that the National Institute of Standards and Technology, also known as NIST, they have a cybersecurity framework that's designed to improve critical cybersecurity infrastructure. It's important that this new scalable cyber resilience framework is used across industries, as well as different products, to emphasize the need for managing cybersecurity risks. So when you look at the steps involved in the framework, it starts with identify. It goes into protect, detect, respond, and recover. And this is typically what people think of when they think of a preventative, detection, suppression, and mitigation set of steps for product safety. So on the next slide, it's also important to understand that when we talk about cybersecurity, security is all about controls. So preventive controls, detective controls, correcting controls, and compensating controls all involve the necessary steps needed to address cyber issues. Standards have an opportunity to provide these types of controls to prevent an attack, provide guidance on ways to detect and suppress an attack, as well as inform the user on how to overcome an attack. One of my recent professors sent a strong message to many of us when he said that not every cyber attack can be prevented, detected, or mitigated. So it's important that compensating controls are in place to ensure that when an attack occurs on the products and systems that we all utilize on a daily basis, there are ways for that product to still function as needed, or when dealing with interconnected devices, that the attack doesn't spread to other areas. So on the next slide, this is the message that many researchers have been communicating to product developers and standards developers. What they've learned over the last few years is that cybersecurity is not enough to overcome the attacks that become more sophisticated each day. The emerging area within cyber deals with resilience, and cyber resilience asks the question, how well can a system survive a cyber incident? So on the next slide, let's transition into our discussion on cyber resilience. So resilience by itself can be defined as the ability to continue, function, or return to normal operation in the event of some type of disruption. Now, going back to the National Institute for Standards and Technology, NIST, they define cyber resilience as the ability to withstand or anticipate, then withstand, recover from, and adapt to adverse conditions, stresses, attacks, or compromises on systems that include cyber resources. So this definition can be applied to a system, to a mechanism, a component, a shared service, or what we like to call systems of systems that talk to each other, which are identified with a mission or business function. So cyber resilience is emerging as a key element in any effective strategy because, as these statistics from the Department of Defense show, 77% of organizations do not have an incident response plan. And 66% of SMBs, which are small and medium businesses, would shut down if hit by a data breach. These are statistics for actual organizations. So imagine the impact of a cyber breach or a cyber attack on a product that incorporates software or interconnected components. On the next slide, here we pulled together some articles, dating back from 2020 that show that throughout the pandemic, there was a significant increase in the number of cyber incidents around the world. So everything from restaurants, healthcare systems, and even school systems all reported increases in cyber attacks by hackers who are now using very sophisticated technology like advanced persistent threats to infiltrate products and systems. Advanced persistent threats, also known as APTs, are a great example of the types of attacks that cyber criminals love because they have a stealth-like nature and they allow for unauthorized access to a computer, a network, or even a system. So these types of attacks can go undetected for extended periods of time while hackers collect data and search through the system, which then amplifies the intensity of the attack. Next slide, please. So with these types of attacks, cybersecurity and again, protections may not be enough. Cyber resilience is again the new area that's emerging to deal with issues that can't be predicted or prevented. Now, many companies have software developers and software architects devoted to finding ways to breach software systems used for a variety of different products. This is a type of wargaming, and this is an actual career in which people, try to basically break a system. It's a preventative tactic, and even the best prevention mechanisms can only combat what are called known knowns, while unknowns that are unpredictable and unforeseeable in the cyber world, like a stealth-like APT, for example, have shown to not be enough to protect against this new level of sophistication. So even all of the kids who are going to school right now to become, software engineers, software architects, to basically hack into different systems. I know some of you have probably seen the hackathons that happen on campuses. Even that's not enough. So I like to think of cyber resilience as a boxing match in terms of how well can the product software system take a punch. The cyber resilience context shown here looks at how systems need a three-step approach to truly ensure safety. So cyber hygiene, cybersecurity, and cyber resilience are all critical components of any software infrastructure. And on the next slide, we can look at cybersecurity and cyber resilience really as a mighty pair. Cyber resilience involves accepting the fact that no cybersecurity solution is perfect or capable of protecting against every possible form of a cyber threat. And this is why the future of the cyber discipline needs both aspects. Again, the cybersecurity strategy is designed to minimize the risk of attacks getting through, but when these attacks inevitably get through, the cyber resilience strategy is there to minimize the impact. And on the next slide, it's important that we truly understand here how all of this cybersecurity and cyber resilience knowledge is used to produce effective standards. So again, Caroline and I work for the standards organization as part of Underwriters Laboratories. And when we look at cybersecurity standards, these types of standards can define both functional and assurance requirements within a product, system, a process, or a technology environment. Well-developed cybersecurity standards enable consistency amongst product developers and serve as a reliable metric for security features. So here you can see a few of UL's software and cybersecurity related standards. This is not our full portfolio, of course, but these are a few that I wanted to share today. What's important with all of these standards is the need to understand risk to develop the relevant security standards and frameworks. So establishing security levels, looking at the structure of the internet interconnected components, and ensuring the system roadmap is executed securely, as well as managing risk by validating and maintaining security. Cybersecurity has, again, been especially important during the pandemic. We think about digitalization a lot and how it has basically saved lives and livelihood throughout the pandemic, by using Zoom and e-commerce and telehealth and virtual visits. A lot of governments, especially in developing countries, view digitalization as the one and only way to support, that economic recovery from the pandemic. And because of this, we know that our existing standards and the future standards that we develop play a pivotal role in accelerating digitalization. If you have ever heard the term the Internet of Things, or IoT, or some of us like to call it the Internet of Everything, connected products has also been even more critical during the pandemic. For the medical industry specifically, there's a focus on enhancing productivity within the healthcare industry and expanding into services such as virtual or contactless healthcare. And between 2016 and 2018, even before the pandemic, our UL 2900 series of standards played a huge part in the work that the Division of Veterans Affairs was doing. And the UL 2900 series of standards, it basically serves as a benchmark to identify critical cybersecurity vulnerabilities and connected medical device deployment. And so this was especially important. So when you look at some of our other standards shown here, in addition to the UL 2900 series, we also have our current standard UL 5500. And this is the standard for remote software updates. And this is the type of standard that we call a horizontal standard, and that it's intended to be used with a product standard in which remote software technology is used to maintain the safety related features. So think about an appliance. We would couple 5500 with that appliance standard to make sure that in addition to all the requirements and testing and examinations that are covered by that standard for the actual appliance, UL 5500 was supplement to deal with the remote software capability. And we know that many products and systems are updated from a remote source, so it's important to ensure that the process is effective in updating these kind of safety components. Really quickly, UL 1998 is another standard within our portfolio, and it covers requirements that are applied to, what we call non-networked embedded software residing in programmable components performing safety-related functions. And that is a mouthful. But essentially, this software standard is designed to ensure that failure of any part of the programmable components of a product does not result in a risk of fire, electric shock, or any type of injury to a person. So again, when products employ software, it's important that the software system is effectively maintained to minimize the dangerous hazards that can impart harm. You all also have standards such as 60730 and 60335, which are not cybersecurity specific, but they are what we call in-product standards that include criteria for addressing safety features like software for household products. Again, things that we all use on a daily basis. So long story short on this slide, implementing effective cybersecurity measures is particularly challenging because there are more devices than people these days. And, as we've talked about, attacks are becoming more innovative and sophisticated, and more products are becoming, interconnected. So our current UL standards really aim at minimizing risk by creating those standardized, testable criteria for assessing, software vulnerabilities and weaknesses in products and systems. This helps reduce exploitation, address known cyber issues like malware, and enhance security controls. So everything that you mentioned in the word cloud, these are all things that good performance-based and good cybersecurity standards can address. On the next slide, let's take some time to revisit that very first question that I posed. So now, hopefully knowing even more about cybersecurity and cyber resilience and the importance of the two of these areas, now, what is your top cybersecurity concern? Let's see if anything has changed. All right, a few more seconds here. All right, wow, way more responses. I see some similar, but yeah, I see a lot about connected devices, products in the home, short-term thinking, still money. Yeah, it's all about the money, right? So excellent, excellent. Well, at this time, I'm actually going to transition things over to Caroline, and she's going to cover sustainability. So thank you.
Thanks, Denise. Hello, everyone. As Denise mentioned, my name is Caroline Treuhart, and I am a standards engineer at UL. And today I'm going to be speaking with you about UL's focus on sustainability, specifically regarding our standards. So we've got another word cloud for you here. If you could, how would you define sustainability? And the reason I asked is there's a lot of different answers, a lot of different ways to approach this. So when you hear sustainability, what word do you think of? Right, earth safety, environmental, yes. Resilience, hackers, yes. And that's right, that's still, all these answers are correct. So with this word cloud, we can see that there's kind of a breadth to the word sustainability and how we can approach it. It's kind of all the things. So when we say sustainability, what do we mean? On the next slide, you're going to see UL's definition of sustainability. And so we had to kind of craft our own approach to this because there is no one official definition in the environmental, social, and governance space for sustainability. So because, as we just saw, it touches so many different regions, we said, what does it mean to us? And so we came up with this definition. And I want to highlight one specific part of this that I think really stands out. And it's saying that the needs of the present without compromising the ability of the future generations to meet their own needs. So we need to do what we can for today to make sure that we can live our lives, but not at the cost of any future generation. So with that in mind, we're going to go to the next slide, and we're going to kind of start with how do we want to address sustainability when we're dealing with our standards. So first, why are we even talking about sustainability? First we have to realize that the way we currently live is not sustainable. And that is shown here on the slide at the top with that linear graphic. And that is an example of the linear economy, which is kind of how everything in today's world works. You extract a material, you make a product, you use that product, and then when you're done with it, you throw it away. And most of our trash, if you will, goes right to the landfill. And so this current way of living is not anything that is going to support future generations and the things that they need to be doing. And so you may or may not have seen that the UN released an IPCC report last year talking about even more of the impacts that are going to present themselves in the world if we maintain our current lifestyle. And so just to briefly summarize that report, it's essentially saying if we can't get our greenhouse emissions under control, the temperature increase on Earth is going to start affecting such things as our food supply. Any coastal community, the rise in the ocean is going to absorb, and we'll have a bunch of displaced populations, which could lead to a rise in poverty and a whole bunch of other issues. So where do we go from here? So we need to kind of take that linear economy and bend it around and make it what we call a circular economy. And so the way the circular economy is different is that once you get to the end of life of that product, instead of tossing it out the window, you put it back into the economy, and it becomes the feedstock for another circle, another use, another life for that material or that product. And so if we manage to do that, we handle a lot of things in our worlds a lot better, and we manage our materials and how we're going to kind of proceed with life a little bit better. So on the next slide, we're going to talk about how this is not a small feat. Circularity is a big deal because it's going to require every item of our paradigm to shift. So product design, energy use, financing, it's all going to change. So how does that affect standards? Well, in looking at our existing standards catalog, we already do have a few standards and guidance documents that deal with sustainability. So they can be very broad, like this first one here on the list, the zero waste to landfill. So we're talking about waste diversion with this ECVP 2799. And then, going around this circle, we have a few other guidance documents that support, the efforts to make things more circular and a little bit more sustainable. And these can also be very specific to a product, which is at the very bottom. You'll see the repurposing of batteries, which is UL 1974. So we kind of have our feet wet with, maybe how we want to address this, and we're starting to build a framework. So on the next slide, we kind of have to think about how we're going to address sustainability and standards. And so there's going to be a bit of a relationship. Is standards, are they going to affect sustainability, or will sustainability affect standards? And so I'm going to show it's going to be a bit of both. So first we have to address the rest of our non-sustainable, if you will, standards catalog. So think of things like smoke detectors or printed wiring boards. We have standards that address those, but obviously they don't currently contain anything addressing sustainability. So how do we look at those and re-examine those and fit in sustainability? Is that possible? So that's our goal, is to kind of go through our entire catalog and see where we can tuck that in. And the way that standards are developed is they're considered consensus documents, which means we have a lot of stakeholders involved when we're writing these documents. So the way that we can make these changes is we have to go to each one of our stakeholders and talk with them and say, what's important to you when it comes to sustainability, and then marry that with, any new research that's coming out on the field and say, we think we can make an impact if we include this in the standard. And so it becomes a negotiation, and we can put that into the standard. So if we're able to do that, how can we tell if we're making a difference? And this is where the UN Sustainability Development Goals come in. And we're going to be using those as guideposts as we proceed down this path. And so what the Sustainability Development Goals are, is they're a strategic approach, essentially, for addressing various aspects of life's activities. So anything that would could be done to potentially, heal poverty or health issues are addressed by these Sustainability Development Goals. But what we're going to be talking, or what we're more focused on, is the climate change aspect of these goals. So we've talked about how we're going to think about our current standards catalog, but how do we write standards going forward? And this is where standards can affect sustainability. So what you're seeing here on the screen are the two kind of ideas that we're thinking about for future development. One is for the safety of sustainability initiatives. So think of things like in the future when you're thinking about, when you're hearing about, you know, oh, this is going electric, everything's going electric, right? Well, it still has electricity running through it, so it's still something that has a potential hazard. So we can support that with the safety of that sustainability initiative. But then we can also develop standards for those sustainability initiatives themselves. So think of something like circular economy. Can we write a standard for the circular economy? Well, we're sure going to try. And we can use the SDGs to kind of help us prove and measure if we're even making a difference. So on the next slide, we kind of have a history. We think we have a game plan. Where do we even start? I mean, this is such a breadth of area to tackle. I mean, it seems a little bit overwhelming. So on the next slide, I'm going to show you some graphics here, a flow chart that shows the future of the ESGs. And you'll see here that this is, it's a bit like the UN SDGs as far as it covers a wide range of array of life. So you've got aging, you've got food, you've got all these things. And are we as standards going to be able to address all of those? Absolutely not. But what we can do is we can see how they're all related, and then we can see where we have strengths. So on the next slide, I've highlighted some of the areas where UL either has current development or we're planning on developing something. But you'll also see here on the first column on the left, the megatrends, we've got climate change, and then we've got technological information. And that, if you follow those black lines, you get to cybersecurity. So in a way, cybersecurity is essentially a sustainability issue if you can trace it back through this chart. So it's interesting how these items all play together. So on the next slide, what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of quickly, I'm running out of time, so I've got to quickly, I'm going to highlight some of these things in the way that standards can be used to help this along. So first, what we're going to focus on is energy transition. And so if we're going to be reducing our greenhouse gases, we've got to be reducing the amount of fossil fuels that we're using. So we're going to transition that energy from fossil fuels to renewable energies. So something like solar or wind, right? So if you're thinking about renewable energies and you're trying to think of maybe what the problem areas are, one huge problem is they're not on all the time, right? And if you need power in the middle of the night and the wind's not blowing and the sun's not out, you know, how are you going to get some power? So on the next slide, one huge area of development is long-term energy storage. So the way that these slides are laid out, when you see these big circle graphs, I'm going to try to help you read this so you can kind of see where I'm going. At the bottom here, we've got any associated UN SDGs that we think are going to be addressed by this approach. And then what you're seeing here is kind of what standards thinks about when we're going to be pursuing a new standard. So we have to address a need in the market. Yes, there's absolutely a need because there's intermittent power. Do we have market support? Absolutely. I mean, oil and gas is getting into renewable energy and they know that this is an issue. Are there any existing standards in the market? No, because this is still a developing technology. And you know, what are the new areas of potential standards development? Well, it's really interesting. I was talking with Dr. Judy Javarajan, I'm sure I said her name wrong, and she did a talk a couple of weeks ago with the Explore Labs, and I've asked them to include the link to her talk here in the chat so you guys can see it. And she spoke about a lot of the battery research that she's doing, and they are, her group within UL is doing research with the University of Houston to study flow batteries, which are a term of long-term storage. And so what they were telling me is that there are so many types of long-term energy storage currently in development right now because it's going to take so many different types of energy storage to make this possible, to make renewable energy a viable energy source. So on the next slide, we're going to talk about resource scarcity. And this is an interesting area to think of for standards, because it sometimes has to do with safety and sometimes it doesn't, and you're like, I don't see how that connection happens. Let me show you. So on the next slide, what we're going to see is this through the lens of life cycle extension. So there is a need, as I was saying earlier, for us to really be a little bit smarter about how we're managing the materials that we're using. So one statistic I saw was that 1 million plastic drinking bottles are purchased every minute, and 5 trillion single-use plastic bags are thrown away each year. So we're still living in that linear economy, that lifestyle of convenience, and we're not being very mindful of the resources that we have here. So life cycle extension is essentially taking what we have and using it in a different way. So you can think of this as like a sharing economy. So I know you guys have probably seen, you know, those scooters or shareable bikes or even Lyft, right? These are situations where everyone, not everyone, I should say a larger group of people are using a fewer number of devices. So we're all sharing 10 bikes instead of everyone having a bike of their own. So not only are we using less material to produce those 10 bikes, those 10 bikes are living a lot harder life. They're getting used way more often, and hopefully they'll stay in circulation a lot longer. But because that's not how the bikes were designed to be or to be used, that presents an interesting conundrum, because they may wear out earlier. That could present a safety issue depending on whatever the device is that's being used. So there's also a rise in 3D printing materials. Actually, I'm going to get to that. I'm going to talk about something else first. So another aspect of life cycle extension is right to repair. And so you may have seen a lot of legislation going through recently, where I think the Biden administration just recently approved right to repair. And you may have seen it in the news where Apple and Microsoft have now kind of opened up folks to be able to fix their own devices, right? So you can purchase repair parts, you can purchase that repair manual, and they let you do it yourself. So from the manufacturer's point of view, their approach to that particular product is different, and the market's approach to that product is different, because now you can go buy somebody else's screw and turn it into your Apple iPhone. It's not necessarily an official Apple screw, but it works. So if you do things like that with larger devices, is that device still safe? Could that potentially affect the functionality and the safety of that particular product? So that's how standards could potentially fit in based on how new products are designed and brought to market. So on the next slide, we're going to talk about repurposing of materials in the concept of resource scarcity. So if you have a product and you kind of approach it in a different way, you may be able to extend its life. And the example that I'm going to use in this case is UL 1974, and that was a standard that was developed to help reassess the lithium-ion batteries that are used in electric vehicles. So those batteries live their first life in a vehicle, and then when that vehicle has done whatever it needs to do, those batteries can come out of that car. And instead of having them go to the waste, they can stay in the economy and still be useful by being combined with other lithium-ion batteries to generate large energy storage systems. So it's a terrific reuse of that technology, but that's also not the original intention of that particular battery, right? So if you pair it with a whole bunch of other powerful batteries, is there a potential for something to go wrong and a whole lot of surging in power or fires to break out? Absolutely. So that is what this standard was written for, is to address if you're going to be using something like that in a different setting than it was originally intended. Just apply this standard, we can reassess it, and then you can prove that it's going to be safe for everyone to use. So that is how resource scarcity and standards can fit together. So on the next slide, I'm going to show you how we, as standards, can address sustainability as an initiative. The things that I've talked about thus far have been sustainability through the lens of safety. But this last example is going to be how we are going to address sustainability as an initiative itself. And so UL is currently developing a standard 3600 for a circular economy analysis. Essentially, the point of this standard is to provide a metric, if you will, to someone if they want to review, if they want to say, how circular is my company, is my product, is my work site. Hopefully the standard should be able to walk you through that process, and it's going to provide you a score and give you an analysis in several different areas. And you can say, okay, I scored pretty well on water and energy usage, but I didn't do so hot in social and air quality. So let me go back and reassess my system, change a few things, and then I can see if I can improve my score. So we're giving them measurable results that they can share with their stakeholders and move forward and show that they themselves are moving along this path of sustainability. So that is what I have for today. Now, don't switch that slide quite yet, because I'm going to sum up real quick. There are a few things looking forward that we know that we need to have happen before we can really start a lot of standards, and that is, kind of where the future of STEM students come in. There is so much for us to know as far as how reused or recycled materials will behave and perform in these types of situations where they're expected to provide longer service. There's definitely a growth in the financial market. If you're interested in business, is how do you readjust, how do you re-strategize a business approach going from the planned obsolescence of all your products. You know that they're going to fail at some point, and they're going to come buy a new phone or buy a new Kindle or something. But if you have to change your approach and those products have to last longer, how do you change your business strategy to make sure that you're still making money? So there's so many different ways that this concept of sustainability is going to reach out and touch everybody, that I really hope that, just this brief glimpse of how we're trying to address these issues and standards is going to make you maybe rethink, how are you going to approach the way you buy clothes, or how are you going to approach, any other issues in your life, hopefully with a sustainability lens. So that's how we're approaching sustainability. I am encouraging everyone else to do the same as well. So thank you very much for listening. And Kelly, I'm going to hand it back to you.
Excellent. Wow, thank you. I have so many questions as usual. and I'm glad that we had the time to hear from both of you and thinking about how there are incredible overlaps and intricacies between cybersecurity and sustainability, although they seem very separate. So we'll bring our cameras back up and turn the slides down for a little while so that we can have our conversation. But really, I think, kind of tagging on to Caroline where you left off, is how would you both describe your personal career path, and just such interesting work that you do, and knowing that there are going to be so many more opportunities in these spaces coming up, even just acknowledging this incredible connection between standards and sustainability, for instance. What was your path to get to where you are today?
Denise, you go first.
Well, thanks, Caroline. I'll say, I knew at an early age that I wanted to study engineering, but I was going to use it as a path to go to law school. And then I went to college, got my undergraduate degree, got some experience with some internships, and said I wanted to stay in engineering. But I will say for me, what engineering presented for me was the ability to help people, to make things safe, to build the types of products that we all love. Everyone wants the newest tech item that comes out. And so that to me, really resonated with, my interests. So I studied engineering in undergrad. My majors were textile engineering, which I know a lot of people haven't heard of, but textile engineering and material science and engineering, because I wanted to develop tissue engineering scaffolds. I thought I was going to go, work with, the medical doctors down here in North Carolina and develop like the best, scaffold or artificial heart or lung. And after my freshman design project, we actually got to go in and watch them insert one. I knew that was not the path for me. So I went to grad school and I studied material science and chemical engineering. So I switched it up a little bit. And I worked for a while in kind of like the performance materials area, mainly in organizations like Intel. And I also interned with the Clorox company, really trying to figure out, how do we utilize materials in a safe way? And what can materials do to support like that new area of innovation and development? And then now I'm doing something completely different. I'm in school for systems engineering, which is like totally aligned with everything that we talked about today, because systems engineering is really the multidisciplinary approach to how do we make all of these things safe that seem completely unrelated when they actually truly like talk to each other, things are becoming connected. So from a systems approach, how do we make sure that things are safe when we utilize them in really kind of the same environments and same functions, every day? So that's my long career path.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Thank you. Caroline, how about you?
I would say that I got into engineering because I was really good at math and science, and I knew I didn't want to do medicine. Same situation as Denise. I saw too much blood and guts, and I was like, that's not the path for me. But I really think as I've gotten older, it's interesting. Let me finish my, I guess, origin story, and then I'll show you how I go back and forth. So I went through engineering as a mechanical engineer, and I went right after school to work in construction firms and for the Department of Defense, doing some just basic research for them. And I realized that I needed something to be a little bit more creative. So I went back to grad school for architectural engineering, and I actually did my thesis on energy conservation through lighting. So different design layouts produce better results in energy use. So that was what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a lighting designer. I thought that was really cool, and it's really hard to get those jobs. There's only so many, and so I ended back up at a construction firm, and I was like, this isn't creative enough. So I went to fashion school because that's what we all do, and I did that for a while, and I realized that I was really excited about being in the plants. I loved the manufacturing aspect of it and how all those parts and pieces went together to create the garment. The garment design was very subjective and dependent on people's opinions, which it's very hard as an engineer to be like, no, that's wrong. And they're like, but it could be this. And I'm like, no. So the manufacturing was very clear cut for me, and I could make that work in my mind. And so that at the time I was making flame resistant uniforms, and so those dealt with standards, and so that's what brought me to UL in doing certification work, and now with the standards department. So that's a long trail to get here, but I've definitely touched a lot of things. And I would say as I've been on the standard side, I'm very interested in now the business aspect, because you're starting to see, how do we approach this? Is this something we can pursue? So those kinds of leanings of finance and all that kind of stuff are starting to intrigue me, and I want to know more.
Yeah, it's so interesting. When you were talking about the UL 3600, I can see how financial systems would need to be aware of that standard and how we actually measure impact in what these circular economy is proposing. And in the financial systems, do you agree that there would be more momentum gained when we can actually show gains that have happened, like almost that there's more buy-in for those types of things?
There's absolutely more buy-in, and that's why I think that standard is super important, because it gives somebody a metric. Like with the UN SDGs that we're going to be trying to align our standards with, that's more of a self-declaration. We say we have met that because we've done these things and we think that's making an impact. Whereas the 3600 is very clear cut. Here are some numbers. Here's something that we can show the stakeholders, and they can take that and say, okay, they're trying. They're learning from this. These are, especially with the social aspect, we're finding with the more research that we do, having that social, the diversity, equity, and inclusion as part of your organization from start to finish is required to do business anymore. So that's something we're seeing shoot through the roof.
Yeah, it's
Did
amazing.
that
And
answer your question?
it did, yes. And you know me, I always have more questions. I'm thinking when you were talking about that, I was thinking, you know, there's the awareness part of the standard, there's the adoption, there's the implementation. Like, how do we, as an organization that creates volunteer standards, how do we help organizations and systems, which I want to come back to in a minute because I see so many connections between your presentations with systems, but how do we help think about adoption of the standards and then help people think about that voluntary component of this being more widespread, I guess is.
I mean, if I'm putting my sales hat on, I would say I would go out to many different industries and companies and say, you know, this is a tool that you can use for, you know, and be able to pair it with some goal that they're trying to achieve, whether that's, you know, showing outreach, trying to get new hires, something like, you know, it's just something that they can share. You know, it's very similar to the DEI track. A lot of things with that is you just have to do it, right? You just have to do it and say, hey, we did it. And then you start to build that culture. So I think 3600 is a great tool that can be used, and we just need to let people know that it's out there once it's published, which it's almost published.
Almost there. That's great. It's very exciting. One of the things one of the commonalities between cybersecurity and sustainability that came through loud and clear for me was that these are standards that have to operate on a systems level. And Denise, you talked about this. One of the systems that came to mind are smart houses. You know, it's not societal level, but it is a system with a million different variables and lots of different devices. What are the, like, how do we think about smart houses as something that's being really pushed in the marketplace, and then we have to look at all of these different variables and where they intersect when it comes to standards?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, Kelly. And it goes back to, you know, things being new and shiny, and everyone wants to implement them. But when you think about smart homes, like that is the crave right now. People want their home to be, you know, such that things are interconnected. When I walk in, Alexa, turn the lights on. You know, when I leave, I can operate my security system or lock my doors from my phone, which is all great and it's convenient and it drives safety in a completely different way. But it can also result in some serious, you know, ramifications. So when we talk about developing standards, we're not going to develop a standard for a smart house specifically. We're going to develop, you know, a standard that covers all of those different areas, but we want those areas to be able to talk to each other. So, you know, a good example is our battery standards or any of our component standards that are within our portfolio. We try to make sure that the end product standards, technical panels, that's the group that manages that standard. We try to make sure that they understand what are these component standards doing, how are they changing and evolving that impact, you know, the end product. And so when you think about smart homes, for example, as you're implementing like all of these new technologies and features, it's important that they talk to each other. So we try to make sure that we keep our stakeholders informed, and education is a huge part of that. The other area that we're really trying to work on is, you know, working with code making authorities, because when you think about a smart house or a smart home in the United States, you know, most of the building codes have specific requirements. We have the National Electrical Code, for example. So now what our standards division is doing is becoming more acclimated with how different codes reference our standards and vice versa. We have standards that reference codes like the NEC and other building codes. So we're trying to, you know, have a better understanding of where our standards are referenced in codes, and then how our standards impact different areas of society, so that we can have a holistic view of, you know, what's truly driving safety and understanding that system of things.
Yeah, I'm also struck by how many, you know, that we talk about standards as being informed by science and engineering. And I'm struck by this notion that it's also really informed by social science and choices, behaviors, all of these things. So it's interesting, and that was another commonality that I saw, was both of these pieces require a bit of a paradigm shift. And I think, Caroline, you said this specifically, like, and paradigm shifts happen in small steps, right? And so I just wonder if you could both say a little bit more about that in the work that you're doing. How do we start to get to a shift in habits or purchasing behaviors, or even just like the use of a device interconnections? Like, is that something that we think about in standards development, or is it really just we have to go into these like small compartments just to stay sane and to keep it bounded so that it's manageable, right?
Denise, you want to go first?
Yeah, I can go first really quickly. I will say that, yes, Kelly, we have to consider all those things, because when we're developing a standard, it's not just about, what are the known hazards that we're trying to mitigate, what are the risks that we're trying to, stop from happening that result in harm, but it's how is somebody going to actually really use this product? And that's a difficult conversation, because we have to say, we have stakeholders or consumers, when dealing with those everyday products, that may not know how to use a product correctly. They may not read the manual. Some people don't like the hard, cover manuals that come with products. They want to look at an online instruction, for example. So how do we make sure that the online instruction reaches the person that doesn't like to, pull up something online? So all of these conversations take place to make sure that we put as much, emphasis on safety as possible. We have to consider all these things. And ultimately, it comes down to that standards technical panel really making the best decision for that stakeholder group. So it's a lot of consideration, a lot of social engineering that goes into it, because we've got to basically reverse engineer things and say, how is this actually going to be used? And then how can we keep it safe in the hands of people who may not use it very well?
Yeah, it's so interesting, that reverse engineering piece, and thinking of the end and then moving backwards to where the standards actually have to be inserted along the way. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Caroline, what do you think?
Absolutely. Especially with sustainability and the paradigm shift, you're right, with a bunch of baby steps. I think the first baby step that society that we can see visually is the sharing economy, right? So we're getting used to less. I think COVID helped as well with a shutdown kind of the supply chains. You're getting used to, what do I really need? How do I really want to spend my money? How do I want to spend my life? And that kind of gut check really helps, I think, people understand how they need to move forward for a better life. And so when you're thinking in that way, you're thinking a little less of, I've got to have every purse that is on the shelf right now in every color, right? And it's a little bit more of, I've got what I need, I'm going to go start making dinner, right? And hanging out with my friends. So so it's just little things like that. But I think also the social pressure. So I think the fact that this is in the news and these are things that especially younger kids are talking about, and that's important to them, then yeah, it's going to move that way, and we need to have our listening ears on and do everything we can to make sure that it's ready for them when they get here.
Yeah, and I agree, and I think one of the pieces that you both touched on, just to come full circle in your career path, and I will say in my career path as well, is that it wasn't a straight line. It was pretty circuitous, actually, and I think that is encouraging. It could be discouraging, and also is encouraging for students working in engineering right now and thinking about where they're going to eventually go. We know that a lot of the jobs that that students will have don't even exist yet. So I think there's a lot to what you've both presented today to think about, and how, Caroline, the listening ears piece will also inform where careers open up and where we get to open up workspace for students in engineering programs and in sciences right now to do what you both are actively doing, which is making a difference in a really positive way. So I'm looking at the time. I, as always, have 400 more questions that we will come to in another webinar on another day, but to honor your time and the time of our attendees this evening, I just want to say a heartfelt thank you for not just your time and energy for tonight, but also just the work that you do. It's incredible and inspiring.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so I am going to just tell everybody a little bit about, actually the next webinar that we have coming up is going to be a perfect tag onto tonight's conversation, because our next webinar is about autonomous vehicles. I mean, talk about systems level analysis and understanding from a standards perspective. So, you know, this is more than an exciting concept. It's really an emerging technology that's being used by a lot of companies and being transformed from design to reality. And so our next conversation will be looking about how those standards are developed. So please join us next time. That's March 1st. And that one will be earlier in the day. That's at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And you can register at the link that just brilliantly dropped into the chat for you all if you're not registered already. And then as a final note, after tonight's presentation, you'll be receiving a survey from us. We read every single comment. We look at every single thing that you tell us and ask us for. We're listening, and we want to make this the best webinar series for you as we continue to build this. So please send us those surveys. And all right, Denise, Caroline, thanks again for your time. And thanks everybody for joining us tonight. We'll see you soon.
Thank you.